Hello again everyone and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John and as always thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the most unexplainable mystery that has ever happened to you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. One time at work years ago, I was dragging a box along the floor into a stockroom. I was looking between my own legs as I shimmied backwards with it so I could see where I was going. And I stopped right as I was about to bump into a customer because I saw his legs. I stood up straight and turned around to find nobody there at all. Either I had an incredibly real hallucination, which has never happened before or since, or I saw a ghost, which I don't believe in, but those legs were there. I had an imaginary friend when I was a kid who I can still see vividly in my mind's eye. He felt like a big brother or older cousin. His name was Hugh. I remember the day he wasn't there anymore. I was 4. I howled and screamed for hours. I felt like I was dying. 16 years later, I went to my aunt's house to babysit my 4-year-old cousin. She was an extremely calm child. I never saw her upset. I walked in the front door and it was like World War III. She was red-faced, screeching at the top of her lungs and bawling her eyes out to the point that my aunt was considering calling in sick to work to mind her. I asked my aunt what was wrong, and she said her imaginary friend disappeared. Eventually she calmed down and my aunt went to work. My cousin told me about her imaginary friend, who was her big brother, called Hugh. She told me what he was like, and he was exactly like my own imaginary friend. A few years ago, another aunt was doing research on our family tree, and found out that at age 16, my grandmother's uncle walked out the front door to go to work and was never seen again. He doted on his little sister, and she was never the same again when he disappeared. She was 4. His name was Hugh. Nobody ever found out what happened to him. I never knew this story as a child, and neither did my cousin. I like to think that we reminded Hugh of his sister in some way, and he wanted to look out for us like a big brother. Halloween 1983. We were really new in town. 2 people in hooded black costumes barged into our house when we answered the door, thinking they were trick-or-treaters. They handed us a card asking us to guess who they were, giving us 3 guesses. If we guessed right, they would unmask. They sat down on our couch. We made our 3 guesses, and all were apparently wrong. They shot up from the couch and wandered out the door again. I still don't know. Edit. For the record, I was 10. My sister was 7. It was one of us who answered the door at the time. They barged in slowly. By the time my mom walked into the room, they were sitting down on the couch. If I had been a smarter kid, I should have locked the door behind them and not let them go until they'd unmasked. And yes, it was the 80s, and we thought this was a thing in this town. There's something called bell snickling, but that's more done at Christmas. But no one ever pulled that stunt on us again. I mean, I guess if it's a tradition, then it is what it is, but you mess around with the wrong house, and that could be a bad day. I was riding in the car with my mom when I was 16, and we're headed home from the grocery store. It was dark out. We lived in the suburbs, and were taking a familiar route home, just going straight. Heading up a small hill through an intersection with a traffic light and a convenience store on our right. Then approaching a corner that weaves through a small wooded area. Suddenly we're back at the hill approaching the same intersection with the convenience store we just drove through. Like time was rewound to 30 seconds. I begin to say, "Mom, what just happened?" And she's already in tears and asks me, "Please just shut up for a second and let me think." When I was around 18, a friend and I were traveling to Europe. We were walking along a pleasant, quiet street in Rome one day and saw an elderly homeless man sitting on the street. He said to us, if he could guess our date of birth, could we give him some money? Of course, we said, okay. He did it. He told us both our correct dates of birth. I've never met him before and never saw him again. I think this happened around 12 years ago when I was 5. We lived on a farm and had a large barn on the opposite side of my window around 50 meters away. I woke up one night and my room was illuminated by orange and red lights. I looked out the window and the barn was completely on fire. I just walked to my parents' room and told them, "Mom, Dad, the barn is on fire." They told me to just go to sleep. The next day the barn was completely destroyed. Only the stone walls and the bars of the roof stood, and they all had burn marks. Mind you, I remember that the barn didn't even have a single scratch the day before. When I pointed out how destroyed the barn was, everyone told me the barn always looked like that. I think I'm insane. When I was 19 or 20 over 15 years ago, my friend and I were driving down a local, very rural back road and saw a thing. It's not something I talk about for fear of sounding crazy, since the friend died about 6 years ago and can no longer corroborate the story. Something ran across the road and looked into our headlights. All I can say is that it was no animal, no human being, no living thing that exists. It was long and gaunt, approximately 8 or 9 feet long, with a human-like face and dark, almost black-gray skin. I still don't know what it was, and people will assume I'm making it up, so I never talk about it. When I was in college, there was a guy named Louis who could always be found on a nearby street corner, waving signs and ranting about symptomatic nerve gas. It's odorless, it's colorless, it will destroy your mind. One day, I was walking past him, and his standard spiel suddenly stopped. He pointed at me and said, "The girl won't ever be happy again after tonight." I laughed it off and continued on my way. Later that night, my parents showed up at my dorm door. My older brother had died on the other side of the country, probably around the time Louis was making his prediction. Driving around trying to find some beer back in high school with a group of friends in 4 cars total. We were all together, pulling into a friend's neighborhood. All the lights suddenly went out in the houses around us, as well as the street lights, and our cars all shut off as we were driving. We get out of our cars freaking out, wondering what was going on. None of our phones had power either. The total time all power was off was about 1 to 2 minutes. Then the neighborhood power came on, our car lights turned on, and our phones powered back on. We live near a large Air Force base, so we just assumed it was something related to the military. I've seen a few weird things for which I have no explanation, but rationally know there is one, like some astronomical event outside my knowledge or some sort of transitional sleep state I was unaware of in the moment. The one thing I've never been able to explain to myself is how my peripheral vision tricked me into seeing my little brother get up and walk away when he never moved, because I wasn't the only one who saw it. Story. When we were kids, my best friend, brother, and I were camped out in the backyard watching the stars. Each of us snug in our own sleeping bag. My friend was in the middle. While we were talking, I saw a shadowy figure on the opposite side of my friend stand up and move toward the house. It was quite dark, and this all looked completely normal, just my brother going in to use the bathroom without saying anything to interrupt my friend and me. A few minutes go by, and my friend and I begin a new subject. My brother hasn't yet returned from the house, but suddenly chimes in from his place on the other side of my friend, and we both shriek. We start demanding to know when he snuck back, and he's adamant that he never moved. My brother was pretty young at the time, borderline too honest and not prone to pranks. He really hadn't moved, and he hadn't snuck back without us noticing. I still don't know exactly what we saw get up and leave. If I'd seen this by myself, I'd assume I was partially asleep and imagining things. There were no dogs in the yard with us. It bugs me. This is more on the paranormal side, but still a mystery to me. So about 10 years ago, our beloved family cat Barney passed away. From the day I was born, Barney had always been around, and I saw him literally every single day. He was 19 when he passed, human years, so he had a very good inning. Anyway, Barney was a mute cat. We literally never heard a meow once, ever. On the day we brought his ashes back from the vet after his cremation, we put them up on the shelf and sat down to watch some TV. Some time passed and the TV show we were watching went quiet. Me and my mom both heard a cat meow from down the side of the sofa. It was clear as day. My mom started crying when she heard it, but I guess I was too young to really understand what it had just happened. We were both adamant that it was him saying his final and only words. It happened only once. I still get goosebumps talking about it. My roommate and I left our dorm room to brush teeth at night before bed, maybe at 1 a.m. I came back and our room was deadbolted. It could only be locked that way from inside or with a key, and both of our keys were locked in the room. It was a room in the basement with tiny windows not big enough for a person to fit through. We ended up having to wake up one of our RAs to unlock it with the master key, and she was furious because she thought we were somehow effing with her. I've never been able to explain it. When our oldest was maybe 18 months old, he looked my wife straight in the eyes while she was giving him a bath and said, "Reincarnation." There are two very weird stories tied to it. He talked and could actually read at a very young age. He had an invisible friend named Wilson Weil that helped colored people travel on the trains. We always assumed this was some Underground Railroad reference, and for the record, we'd never utter the phrase colored people. He also claimed Wilson has a baby that slept in his chest of drawers, something that was pretty common in the 1800s, and where did he get the chest of drawers from? By far the weirdest was when he was probably 3 or 4, and we were going to the wedding of one of my wife's dear friend's daughters out of town. She was carrying a Vietnamese guy named Hung. We took our son with us, and my mother-in-law came down to watch him. He had never met Hung before, but the entire car ride up and that day or so leading up to the wedding, all he could talk about was seeing Hung. When do we get to see Hung? Where's Hung? Why isn't Hung here? We went to the wedding and reception. Our son didn't go, and the next morning, Sunday, they had breakfast. Our son was playing in the lobby of the hotel when all of a sudden he freezes, turns, and bolts straight out the hotel lobby into the portico and out of the parking lot, running full speed. We chased after him only to catch him as Rachel and Hung were walking me through the parking lot. There stood our son, and he pointed straight at Hung and said, "It's me." Hung looked around a while. What the F is happening? And who the hell is this kid that knows my name? We still laugh about it to this day, and oddly enough, Hung and our son, who is now a freshman in college, actually text one another on a regular basis. It's like they were old friends from a past lifetime. When I was around 7 years old, I slept over at my grandmother's house. My grandmother is Hungarian. In the wee hours of the morning, I woke up and looked at the side of my bed where there is a long console table. On top of the table was an old woman dressed in very old-fashioned clothing. She spoke to me in Hungarian. Mind you, I did not and still do not speak the language. She said to me that someone wants to come through, as in come into the physical world, i.e. be born, and asked if I would birth this person. I agreed, but she said that they wanted to come soon, basically when I was quite young. I deliberated with her for a bit, having a back and forth exchange with her on how 15 was too young for me, and to have a child is needed to finish school first. After a bit of back and forth, she said 17 and I agreed. She also mentioned that I would only have another child much later in life. She then went on to tell me that life is going to be very hard, but it will get easier. The strange thing is that I didn't feel 7 years old at the time. It's almost like it wasn't trapped by age, if that makes sense. She then told me to go back to sleep. I still remember it clearly the next day and told my mother. Upon waking up, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't me dreaming that I woke up. I very distinctly remember myself waking up and being afraid of first seeing someone there. The strange part is that many years later at 17, I found myself pregnant. I only just finished high school by the skin of my teeth. I'm in my 30s now, and I've been through a lot of hardship that most people age, hasn't gone through. My life has been so rough that I've had to get long-term medication and therapy to deal with things that they have happened to me. As a weird extra, I don't know if this is any bearing, as I'm sure there are a lot of people out there with the same thing, but my son's palms lines on both hands form a versatile, very distinctive clear star on each palm. I've also not gotten pregnant again yet. However, on 2 separate occasions, many years apart, I have had a self-proclaimed psychic and a sangoma tell me, both times without payment, and both saying they were told to tell me that I will have another son much later in life. It's a bit spooky. The last weird thing was that a few years ago, my grandmother's last brother died, leaving her as the last one alive of her siblings. She was sent an old photo album that had belonged to him. Inside was a picture of my grandmother's grandmother, a super old picture that I'd never seen before, as it was the one and only photo of her. Lo and behold, it's the woman who spoke to me all those years ago. Freaked me the F out. I don't want or have an explanation for this.